My father believed he was the most important man in any room he walked into. For 31 years of my life, I let him believe that, because believing it was the only thing that kept him from looking too closely at me. This is the story of the night he finally looked, and what he saw made him sit down faster than he'd ever sat in his life. My name is Avery Brennan. I grew up in a yellow house on a quiet street in Annapolis, Maryland, with a brass eagle over the door and a grandfather clock in the foyer that my father wound himself every Sunday night at exactly 9 o'clock. My father was Vice Admiral Thomas Brennan, United States Navy, 3 stars on his shoulder boards by the time I turned 16, and he wore them the way other men wear wedding rings, like a vow that defined him. He had 2 children, my older brother Connor, who was supposed to carry the legacy, and me, who was supposed to disappear politely into a marriage with someone respectable, preferably a junior officer with a future. Connor went to the Naval Academy. He flunked out his second year over a cheating scandal nobody in our family ever discussed at the dinner table. My father's solution was to pull every string he had to get Connor a civilian job at a defense contractor in Virginia, where he could collect a paycheck and pretend the uniform he never earned was just a choice he made. Me, my father didn't know what to do with, so he ignored me. I remember being 7 years old, standing in the kitchen in a sundress my mother had ironed twice because the first time wasn't good enough, holding up a science fair ribbon. Second place, I built a working model of a sonar system out of PVC pipe and a tone generator I'd salvaged from a busted radio. My father glanced at the ribbon, then at my mother, and said, "Connor's making the JV lacrosse team next year. Did you hear?" My mother said something soft and apologetic. My father walked into his study and closed the door. The ribbon was still in my hand when I went up to bed. That's the kind of memory that doesn't fade. It calcifies. It becomes the foundation you build a person on top of. By the time I was 10, my father had a habit of inspecting my room every Sunday morning before church. He'd stand in the doorway in his dress whites and run his eyes over my desk, my bookshelf, the corner where my shoes were lined up. He never said anything when it was right. He always said something when it was wrong. A book out of place, a sock under the bed. Once he found a single thumbtack on the carpet and didn't speak to me for the entire car ride to St. Anne's. I was 11. My mother, Linda, was a former Navy nurse who'd given up her career when she married him. She loved me, I never doubted that, but she loved my father more. Or maybe she was just more afraid of him. And the difference between those two things gets harder to tell the longer a marriage goes on. She used to whisper to me after the worst dinners, "He's just under a lot of pressure, sweetheart. He doesn't mean it." I stopped believing her around the time I got my driver's license. I applied to the Naval Academy without telling him. I got in on my own merit, my own SAT scores, my own letters of recommendation from teachers who actually saw me. When the acceptance letter arrived in April of my senior year of high school, I sat on it for 2 days. I wanted one moment of pride, just one, before he could take it from me. When I finally told him at dinner on a Wednesday night, he chewed his pot roast for a long time and then said, "You'll wash out." Connor was twice the candidate you'll ever be, and he didn't make it through. He didn't even put his fork down. I plebed in. I didn't wash out. I graduated in the top 10% of my class with a degree in operations research and a commission as an ensign in the United States Navy. My father came to graduation because my mother begged him. He shook my hand on the parade field. He didn't hug me. He told me, "Don't embarrass the name." I served 4 years as a surface warfare officer on a destroyer out of Norfolk, and somewhere around my second deployment I started getting tapped for things. Quiet things. A tactical analysis cell that wasn't on any organization chart. A school down at Dam Neck where they teach you to think differently. A selection process I'm not allowed to talk about even now, where they put you in a room and break you down until they find out what's actually inside you. What they found inside me was patience and rage. The kind of rage that doesn't show on your face, the kind you've had for so long you forget it's there. They told me I had the cleanest discipline of any candidate they'd evaluated in 3 cycles. I held a position once in a swamp in North Carolina for 31 hours without moving. The instructor told me later that he'd watched me on infrared and thought I'd died. I became a member of a unit that doesn't appear in any unclassified document. My job, on paper, was Naval Intelligence Liaison. Off paper, I had a different specialty and a call sign that fewer than 100 people in the country were cleared to know. Halo 6. For 7 years, I lived 2 lives. To my family, I was the daughter who'd settled into a desk job somewhere in the bowels of an intelligence office, doing something boring with spreadsheets. My father liked it that way. It confirmed what he'd always believed about me. At Christmas dinners, when relatives asked what I did, my father would answer for me before I could open my mouth. Avery's a paper pusher up at Suitland. Connor's the one with the real career. Defense contracting. Big stuff. Connor would smile his rehearsed smile. I would cut my ham. To the people who actually knew me, I was Halo 6, and I had a number next to my name in a database in a building most Americans don't know exists. I had 2 confirmed long-distance engagements that changed the geopolitical posture of 2 different regions. I had a Bronze Star with Combat V tucked in a shoebox under the bed in my apartment in Arlington. I had a letter, handwritten, from a former Secretary of Defense that said the words, "The nation owes you a debt it cannot acknowledge." I had nightmares about a rooftop in a place I can't name, and a child who walked into the frame at the wrong second. And a decision I made in 3/4 of a second that I will carry until I die. I was 31 years old, a lieutenant commander, and on the night this story turns, I was wearing a navy blue cocktail dress my mother had picked out for me at a Nordstrom in Pentagon City, because my father was being honored at the Navy Memorial Foundation's annual gala in Washington, D.C., and my mother had insisted I attend. "Please, Avery," she'd said on the phone. "He's getting an award." It would mean something. It wouldn't mean anything. But I went because she asked, and because some part of me that I hate still wanted to see if this would be the night something cracked. The gala was at the Mellon Auditorium on Constitution Avenue. Marble columns, gold leaf, a string quartet playing something forgettable, 200 people in dressed uniforms and gowns. My father stood near the bar with a circle of admirals and a few civilian VIPs from the Hill, holding court, the way he always did, his laugh loud enough to carry. Connor was there with his wife, a pleasant woman named Brittany who sold real estate in McLean, both of them orbiting my father like satellites that had forgotten there was a sun anywhere else in the sky. I was at a side table with my mother, who was sipping a club soda and watching her husband talk to people who mattered. "You should go say hello," she said. "He hasn't looked over here once, Mom." "He will." He did eventually. About 40 minutes in, he spotted me across the room with that particular flicker of his eyes that meant he'd noticed something he hadn't planned for, and he beckoned me over with 2 fingers, the way you call a waiter. I went, because I told my mother I would. The circle parted to let me in. My father did not introduce me. He glanced at me sideways and said, to the rear admiral on his left, "This is my daughter. She works up at Suitland, pushes paper for the intel folks." The rear admiral, a tall woman with kind eyes whose name tag read Vance, looked at me with the polite curiosity of someone meeting a stranger. "What sort of work, Lieutenant Commander?" she asked, reading my rank from the stripes she could see at my shoulder line through the dress. Before I could answer, my father did. "Logistics analysis. Procurement metrics. Nothing that would interest you, Diane." He laughed his bar laugh. "She schedules fuel allocations and orders office supplies. Makes sure the printers have toner." The rear admiral's eyes flickered. I think she could tell something was wrong. She smiled at me anyway and said, "All vital work, Commander. Lord knows the building doesn't run without it." It was a kindness. I appreciated it. My father turned his shoulder to me, which is the Navy way of saying dismissed. I went back to my table. My mother put her hand over mine. "He's just nervous about his speech," she said. "Right," I said. "Sure." The award ceremony started at 8:30. My father walked up to the podium to a standing ovation. He gave a speech I'd heard versions of for 20 years. Duty, sacrifice, the silent professionals who keep this country safe, the family that stands behind the warfighter. He thanked my mother. He thanked Connor by name, calling him my son, the future of this family's service. He did not mention me. He looked directly at our table when he said the part about Connor, and I watched my mother's hand tighten around her napkin. The applause was thunderous. He came down off the stage and worked the room. I sat at the table and ate a piece of chocolate torte I didn't taste. Around 9:45, my father was back near our table holding a bourbon, mid-anecdote with 3 captains and a Marine colonel. I'd stood up to find the restroom when he caught my arm. "Where do you think you're going, Lieutenant Commander?" I said. "Powder room, sir." I said sir because we were in uniform-adjacent company and I had been raised to. "Sit down," he said. "Excuse me." I said sit down. "You're embarrassing your mother, fidgeting all night. Sit down and act like you belong here." The captains went still. The colonel looked at his drink. My father's voice had carried, the way it always did, and a small bubble of silence had formed around our table. I said very quietly, "I'm just going to the restroom, Dad." "You're a nobody at this event, Avery." He said it loud. He said it with a smile, like it was a joke we were all in on. "You're a paper pusher in a borrowed dress. You don't have the standing to be wandering around like you're somebody. Sit down." I felt something in me go cold. Not angry. Cold. The way it goes cold on a glass at 400 meters when the wind picks up and you have a single decision to make and a single second to make it. I sat down. I sat down because the alternative was a scene in front of 200 people that would have ended my mother's evening, and because the cold had told me to wait. I'd been trained to wait. My phone vibrated in my clutch. Then it vibrated in Guy's clutch. Then it vibrated again, then a third time, in the rapid sequence I'd memorized 7 years ago, and could feel in my sternum the way a horse feels a coming storm. I'd left my work phone at home, the way you do when you go to a black tie event in a dress with no pockets. The thing buzzing in my clutch was my personal phone, but the number coming through was a number that should never, ever, under any circumstance, call me on an unsecured line. It was calling me anyway. I excused myself. I stood up. My father said, "Sit down, Avery. I'm not finished with." "I have to take this, Dad." I walked to a service alcove near the kitchen, ducked behind a column, and answered. The voice on the other end was a duty officer I'd worked with for 4 years, and his voice was tight in a way I'd heard exactly twice before in my career. He said 5 words. Then he said a 7-digit authentication code. I gave him the countersign. He said, "How long until you can be at Andrews?" I said, 40 minutes if I leave now. There's a problem. I'm undressed at the Melon, and the only person here with a vehicle is... Make it work, Halo. Wheels up at 2300. The colonel is asking for you by name. He hung up. I stood behind that column for about 6 seconds, because 6 seconds was all I had. Then I walked back into the main hall, and I walked across the marble floor toward my father. He was still holding court. He saw me coming, and his face went hard. "I told you to sit down." "Dad," I said, "I need your car keys." He laughed. He actually laughed in front of the captains and the colonel, and he said, "She thinks she's leaving. She's had a glass of wine, and she thinks she's leaving. Avery, sit down. We will discuss your behavior later." That was when the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. A man in dress blues came through them, fast, the way men move when someone has told them the time matters more than the manners. He was a full Navy captain, seal trident, salt and pepper haircut high and tight, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has just been pulled off a black phone in a black sedan and told to find one specific person in a building of 200. His eyes swept the room. He had a paper in his hand. His name was Captain Marcus Hale. I had served with him. I had served under him. He was the operational commander of the unit I was attached to. He scanned the floor. He saw me. His face did something complicated. He raised his voice. He said, "I need a Tier 1 sniper in this room. Now." The string quartet stopped playing. 200 people turned. I stood up. My father, beside me, half-turned, half-clothed, half-confused. He grabbed my wrist. He said loud, "Sit down, Avery. Don't embarrass yourself. You don't even know what he's asking for." I looked at his hand on my wrist. I looked at his face. I have looked into faces in worse circumstances than this, and not blinked. I did not blink. I said, "Let go of my arm, Dad." "Avery, Captain Hale," I called across the room, my voice clear enough to carry. "Is this a recall?" Captain Hale walked toward our table. He did not hurry. He did not need to. The room parted for him. He stopped in front of me, and he looked at my father for exactly half a second, long enough to register the 3 stars he was wearing, long enough to dismiss them, and then he looked at me. "Lieutenant Commander Brennan," he said. Confirm call sign. The room was silent. My father's hand was still on my wrist. I could feel his pulse in his thumb. I said, Halo 6. Captain Hale nodded once. Halo 6, you are recalled. Wheels up at 2300. Vehicle is outside. Get in. My father's hand fell off my wrist like it had been cut. I have replayed his face in my memory many times since that night, and I will tell you that what I saw on it was not pride, not surprise, not even shame. Not exactly. It was something more complicated and more naked. It was the face of a man who had just understood, in the space of 3 seconds, that the daughter he had spent 31 years dismissing had been, all along, the kind of person his career was built on protecting. That the paper pusher he had just announced to a room of his peers was a member of a unit whose name he, a 3-star vice admiral, was not even clear to read in full. That every dinner table joke, every Christmas dismissal, every she schedules fuel trucks, had been delivered by a man who did not know who his own daughter was. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Rear Admiral Vance behind him said quietly, Hello 6. My God. A senior Marine general I hadn't seen all night, a man with 4 stars on his shoulders who'd been at the head table, stood up. Stood up. For me. He nodded at me across the room, the small, precise nod that means I know what you've done, and I will not say it out loud. My father was still standing there with his mouth open. I turned to him. I will be honest with you. There was a part of me, the 7-year-old part of me, that wanted to lean into his face and say something cruel. There was a part of me that had been writing that sentence for 24 years. I didn't. The cold had told me to wait, and the cold had been right, and the cold told me now that there was nothing I could say to this man in this room that would mean as much as walking past him without saying it. I looked at my mother. She was crying. She was crying and her hand was over her mouth, and I have never been sure. Since that night, whether she was crying because she was proud, or because she was guilty, or because she had spent 33 years sitting next to a man and now had to wonder, in front of a room of his peers, what else she'd been wrong about. I picked up my clutch. I said to her gently, I love you, Mom. I'll call you when I can, I said to my father. And this is the only thing I said to him, the only thing I have said to him since. Goodbye, Dad. I walked across the marble floor in heels I didn't feel, and Captain Hale walked beside me. And the 200 people in that room watched in absolute silence. At the door I paused. I turned. I looked back, just once, the way you do. My father had not moved. I got in the black SUV at the curb. The driver was already on the radio. We were at Andrews in 34 minutes. I changed in a ready room into a flight suit that fit me better than the dress had. And at 2300 local, I was on a C-37 with 3 other operators and a mission folder in my lap. And I did not think about the Gala for the next 41 hours. What happened in those 41 hours, I cannot describe to you. I can tell you that we came home with everyone we left with, which is not always how it goes. I can tell you that I made a shot at 470 meters in a crosswind that I will, on my deathbed, still not be able to explain. I can tell you that the President of the United States was briefed on the outcome at 0630 Eastern on the second morning, and that 2 weeks later, in a small room in a building most of you have never heard of, a man with 5 stars in his lifetime of service shook my hand and said, Halo 6. The country thanks you. I'm sorry I can't say so out loud. When I came home to my apartment in Arlington, there were 17 voicemails from my mother on my phone. There was 1 voicemail from my father. I have not listened to it. I don't know if I ever will. I keep it on my phone the way you keep a scar. Not because it's beautiful, but because it's part of how you got here. My mother and I have lunch every other Saturday now, at a diner in Crystal City. She left him 8 months after the Gala. She took an apartment in Alexandria and started painting again. Watercolors mostly, and she told me one Saturday over coffee that the night I walked out of the Melon was the night she finally understood she'd been lying to herself for 40 years. Connor and I don't speak. He sent me a long email about a year ago about how I'd humiliated Dad and how the family had never recovered. I wrote back 2 sentences. I don't remember exactly what they were. I remember they were kind and they were final. My father retired 6 months after the Gala. He lives in a house on the Severn River with a flagpole in the yard. I hear, secondhand, that he tells a different version of the story now, one in which he always knew, in which he was always proud, in which the moment in the auditorium was a moment of vindication for his hard parenting. I let him have it. People like him need a story to live inside, and the truth would not fit. Here is the thing I want you to take from this. If you take anything. I spent 31 years trying to earn the approval of a man who had decided, before I was old enough to walk, that I was not someone he was going to approve of. I built a career he could not have imagined, in service of a country he claimed to love. And I did it in part because some quiet, desperate 7-year-old part of me believed that if I just got good enough, if I just got quiet enough at the right kinds of work, he would finally see me. He didn't see me until a SEAL captain shouted my call sign across a marble room. And even then, what he saw was not me. What he saw was the failure of his own imagination. You don't have to wait for the marble room. You don't have to wait for a captain to walk through the doors and say your name. Whatever you have built, whatever you have survived, whatever quiet, brutal version of yourself you have forged in the dark while the people who were supposed to love you were looking the other way, that is yours. It does not require their witness. It does not require their permission. I am Halo 6. I am Avery Brennan. I am my mother's daughter, and I am no longer my father's. I am enough, and I have been enough, and I was enough at 7 years old in a sundress holding a second-place ribbon, and the only person in that kitchen who didn't know it was the man in the dress whites. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait 31 years for someone to look up. You are already the person you are trying to become. Stand up when you're called. And when you're not called, stand up anyway. I think about that marble floor sometimes, the way my heels sounded crossing it, the way the string quartet had stopped mid-note, the way my father's hand fell off my wrist like it had been cut. For 31 years, I tried to be loud enough for a man who had decided he wasn't going to listen. I built a career in rooms he wasn't clear to enter. I held my breath in places I can't name. I made decisions in 3/4 of a second that I will carry the rest of my life. And underneath all of it, if I'm honest with you, was a 7-year-old girl in a sundress holding a second-place ribbon, still waiting for her dad to look up. What I learned, and what I want you to learn faster than I did, is that there is a kind of cause and effect that runs through a life like a current under still water. My father chose every single day for 3 decades to look past me. He chose it at the kitchen table. He chose it on graduation day. He chose it at the gala. And every choice he made compounded the way interest compounds, until the night his choices walked him directly into a room where the daughter he had dismissed was the only person who could do the thing his country needed done. That wasn't fate. That wasn't karma in some mystical sense. That was the simple math of a man who had built his life on not seeing, finally being shown. The other thing I learned is that there are 3 things a person actually has in the end. The first is their integrity, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need an audience. I held a position for 31 hours in the swamp because nobody was watching, and it turned out somebody was, and it turned out it was me. That's the only audience that ever really mattered. The second is their mind. My father had 3 stars and a corner office, but my mother told me once that he hadn't read a book that wasn't a memoir of another admiral in 20 years. A mind that stops asking questions stops growing, and a man who stops growing eventually gets passed by people he never bothered to notice. The third is endurance. Not the loud kind, the boring kind. Showing up. Doing the work. Refusing to quit on yourself even when the people who were supposed to believe in you have already filed you away. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling small in a room full of people who decided who you were before you walked in, I want you to know something. You don't owe them the version of yourself they already wrote. You owe yourself the version you are still becoming. Stand up when you're called. And on the days no one calls, stand up anyway and walk toward the work that's yours. That's how you build a life nobody can take from you.